Good morning to you all, and welcome to this webinar on youth unemployment conundrum. We would like to thank the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development for organizing this webinar. Before we start, I would like to invite Mr. Guanu McDonald, on behalf of the President of EBID, to give us his opening speech. You have the floor, sir.
Merci, Dr. Gossou, et merci tout le monde.
Bon, thank you very much,
le président
Gossou,
de la Banque
I welcome all of you to this
et de
webinar.
développement de la BIDC,
The president of the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, Dr. George Ajekum Nana Donko, has asked me to step in his shoes this morning to deliver this speech. And given the fact that I am an Anglophone, I would like to present my speech in English.
Excellencies here connected, present, members of the EBID team here present as well.
Ici présent, chers membres du personnel de la BIDC.
Experts and other distinguished invitees.
Et
distinguished ladies and gentlemen,
mesdames et messieurs.
Well, we are very much happy to
have you très heureux
connected to this webinar, which seeks to address a very fundamental issue facing our sub-region. So we are very pleased to say that the theme of this year's webinar is addressing West Africa's youth unemployment conundrum. Why is that important? The World Bank and other sources put the level of unemployment, youth unemployment in the sub-region at 7.9%. But one can see that this is clearly not the case, because most of our, if you see on the ground what is happening today, you see that a lot of people, a lot of our youth are unemployed. So you can recall that during our meeting economic forum on the 4th and 5th of April this year in Lomé, the Togolese Republic, there were a number of calls for an intervention in youth unemployment. So the president of the bank and secretary today, you can recall that most of the problems, a number of experts have ascribed the problems that are taking place today in our sub-region to unemployment. Most of the youths in the sub-region and other parts of Africa are crossing the Mediterranean and going to other places because of the level of unemployment in the region. So it is so appropriate at this time for us as a bank, for us as a sub-region. So we are dedicating and consecrating this year's the 49th anniversary of the founding of ECOWAS to this topic, which addresses West Africa's youth unemployment. On behalf of the president of the bank and also the management team, I would like to say that we are very much happy that you are here. And having said that, I will formally declare this webinar officially open, and we will all would like for you to bring your perspective to bear so that we can do. Thank you so much. We are very much glad that you are connected, and we are very much glad that whatever contribution you make here will go a long way in shaping our sub-region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor McDonald Guano. We are going to continue with our webinar. May I inform participants that this webinar is being interpreted in English and in French. When you take a look at your screen down, you have the interpretation option. Kindly click on it and select English or French according to your preference. We will now proceed to give the floor to our panelists, who will delve into the matter. This will be followed by discussions and questions and answers. This session is to enable our panelists to share their experiences with us so that we can understand the gray matter of the topic. May I now call upon you all to also use the chat box. Ask your questions in the chat box, and those questions will be channeled to the panelists for clarifications. Right. After the end of the webinar, we crave the indulgence of all participants to answer the questionnaires. These questions will enable EBID to better organize future webinars. This webinar is also coming with workshops, or those workshops are dedicated to captain of industries who will give you the insights of business. They will show you how to put together business strategies, business plans. They will share their experiences with you so that you can also become captains of industries in the near future. Therefore, I invite you to also take part in the workshop immediately after the webinar. As Professor McDonald Guanu said, the unemployment of youth in the West Africa sub-region has become a conundrum because the World Bank has demonstrated that the youth represent 60% of jobless people. Senegal, for instance, Senegal trains more than 200,000 youth year in, year out. And same is for many of our countries. These teeming youth that are supposed to use their skills to contribute to the economic development of the continent are not able to do so because the jobs are not there. The youth are vibrant. We need to champion economic growth. But where is the imbalance coming from? That is why there is a conundrum. We cannot continue to train the youth, whereas there's no job for them. That is why we are gathered this morning around this platform to discuss and go into the integrities of the matter. EBID has invited the best of the best. We have identified those who have gone there, done it, and won the t-shirts. Those are the people we have here. The first person to take the floor is Simon Temaema. He has 15 years of experience in financial management as well as in organizational management. He's also an expert in alternative financing. He is the current General Secretary of the SME's operational structure in Togo. He has been very active in ensuring that the youth of Togo are engaged in revenue-generating activities. He has also been a member of the task force put together by the Office of the President of the Togolese Republic on the youth unemployment. Simon, we would like to thank you very much for responding positively to our invitation. I now give you the floor to proceed. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for this brief presentation. I would like to thank the keynote speaker as well. I am very honored to be the first to be taking the floor, looking at the caliber of people who are called on this call. I also would like to thank EBID for organizing this very important webinar. And this is well appreciated, not only by myself, but also the institution that I represent. As a matter of introduction, you've already set the pace. The question that brought us together here this morning is very crucial. It's a matter that is at the center of all policies in the region. When you take the sub-region, for instance, many are those countries that have developed policies to tackle the problem of youth unemployment. The issue is that there are little employment opportunities for the youth, and the labor market is also changing. A greater part of the youth are lacking the employable skills because of the mismatch between our curriculum as well as the needs on the labor market. Now, on the other hand, we have another category of the youth who are highly qualified, very skillful, yet the jobs are not there. Now, faced with this situation, the only way out is entrepreneurship. And the statistics are showing that as of today, the SMEs and SMI are important tools in creating jobs. And it is statistics have been saying that they have the potential of creating over 60% of jobs across the globe. We also understand the importance of SMEs and SMI in economic growth of our respective countries. But unfortunately, despite the fact that the SME, SMIs can create jobs, they are faced with a lot of difficulties. And what is even worsening the case is that they do not have access to financing. And this also worsens our productivity in the sub-region. As a national guarantee for access to financing by SMEs and SMIs in Togo, our mandate is to come in between the small and medium-sized companies and the financial institutions to help them to have access to financing so that these companies can play the role for which they were established. Now, what are we bringing on the table? What we do mostly is to promote access to financing by coming up with tailor-made financing mechanisms for these SMEs and SMIs. Another added value that my institution brings on board is to support these SMEs and SMIs to be more competitive. This is the time we need to tell ourselves the truth. Only if we acknowledge the fact that entrepreneurship is the way out, some of the youth find themselves constrained to go into entrepreneurship, meaning they find entrepreneurship to be the only way out without necessarily understanding what entrepreneurship really is. I also would like to say that we must take a critical look at the value chain. Value chain is something that my institution is leveraging on in order for us to promote a conducive environment for the SMEs and SMIs to have access to market. When we take Togo, for instance, we have about 56,600 square kilometers and about 8 million population. That is why the market size of the country is so limited. Now, there is the need for our producers to have access to other markets, and having access to other markets means we have to produce more and to be more productive and more competitive as well. Now, in order to bring my intervention to a conclusion, I would like to say that my structure is mandated to make companies more competitive, to have access to affordable financing resources in order for them to be more competitive. Because if they are not competitive, we cannot create the jobs and we cannot make the SMEs and SMIs crucial in the economic development of not only Togo, but also to the entire region. I would like to end here now, but I'll come back later to find answers to respond to solutions, questions that might be directed to me. Once again, I thank you and over. We thank you, Madam Simone Tebayema, for your well-structured and well-enriching introduction. We will certainly have the opportunity to tackle some of the concerns you raised, especially some practical matters you raised. This is just by the introduction to the theme. Our second invited guest is called Benedicta Lassie. Benedicta is a very brilliant Ghanaian lawyer. She's equally an entrepreneur and an expert in developmental issues, well acclaimed. She is well engaged continentally, and she is currently a co-founder for the African Investment Consortium. She is also a member of many think tank organizations across the continent. Some of them is the African Center for Governance. Benedicta, we would like to thank you very much for responding to our invitation. Now, preliminary speaking, what is your take on the topic addressing the West Africa's youth unemployment? You have the floor. Your microphone, please.
Thank you very much, EBID, and thank you very much to the organizers of this webinar for inviting me. I think, as has been mentioned, this is the build-up on the conversations we started at the ECOWAS Investment Forum, which clearly highlighted the need for us to begin to prioritize issues of unemployment and also entrepreneurship development in the sub-region. I think that for most participants on this call, the webinar which spoke to addressing the unemployment, some would have joined the webinar hoping that employment opportunities, maybe with EBID or within the sub-region, would be provided. But I think as we go along in the conversation, we would see why the conversation is being structured the way it is. And I think my colleague Simone and also McDonald addressing this issue earlier has alluded to the fact that it is a challenge that we all have to take on board. And as African youth, or as West African youth, now is our turn, after our forefathers and mothers liberated the continent politically. Now is our turn to take on the economics, because we know that it is only through economic transformation that we can begin to see the prosperity that we all want for our continent and for our people. So I joined this webinar as the executive chair of the African Trade Chamber, which is essentially a Pan-African chamber mobilizing private sector across the continent and different industries. Now, when we talk about addressing this unemployment challenge that we have, we all know that, yes, Africa is touted as having a demographic dividend, which means that, yes, we have a youthful population, and so we have the workforce. Now, having the workforce also presents with its own peculiar challenges, which means that governments and institutions must begin to look at how it engages these workforce meaningfully. If you look at this issue, there are several stakeholders that are involved or must be involved in addressing this issue. And I think that as a preliminary comment, I'll just identify some of these stakeholders and what roles we must begin to see them playing. Now, if you look at the multilateral level and institutions that bring together our governments, like ECOWAS, like EBID, like AfriExim, they have basically the mandate to create the shared prosperity, or work with various governments to create a shared prosperity for the continent and for our young people. Now, in their programs and in their policy development, their priority areas must clearly begin to look at how we address these issues. And that is why I'm happy that EBID is taking this upon itself to begin to mainstream this conversation, and mainstreaming the conversation around youth unemployment and also youth development is the only way we put the issue front and center with our policymakers and also our institutional leaders to begin to prioritize and have the conversations and also find solutions to this problem. And that goes into the programs that they sort of roll out. We see Odi, Mr. Odi here from AfriExim, who is in charge of the SME development with the bank. And we have to see that the bank is committing a lot more of its resources, not just in infrastructure development, because once you develop infrastructure, you have to get your population to utilize this infrastructure. That's the only way we can justify the various sums of money or heavy investments in infrastructure. And so SME development, creation of opportunities for young people to be innovative is the only way we can transfer, or we can transform these investments into significant returns on investment for the people of the continent. Now, aside these multilateral institutions and development finance institutions, we also have our government. And I think that within ECOWAS, yes, we have seen that we've had certain issues when it comes to government policy and prioritizing of the youth as a key pillar for economic transformation in the sub-region. I had the opportunity to put together a policy recommendation for the development of Ministry for Youth Development. And the argument that I make in that document is that unless we begin to prioritize the issues of education and training, the issues of how government lead in that aspect, the issue of how government is also working within its own policy framework, but also with private sector to create jobs, which also means that government has to take on this responsibility of creating an environment that is conducive for the private sector to be able to create the necessary jobs and to offer employment to our young people. And also government's role in entrepreneurship development. And I think that's where our sister, my sister Simone, sits in Togo, where basically the government is putting together a task force to look at how it builds its SMEs. I think we need our government to begin to prioritize that, and it must start with the policy implementation architecture. So in most of the countries, you would see that in West Africa, you would see that the Ministry of Youth is either going with culture or with sports. Now, in my country, Ghana, where the Ministry of Youth and Sports is one ministry, I can tell you that over the years, the budget for the youth has never gone beyond 15%. So most of it goes into sports, and not just all the sports, but mostly football. And so the Black Stars are the priority. And we all know that, yes, as Africans, we enjoy our sports, we enjoy our football, but we must also recognize that the much broader conversation around youth development is important, and we must begin to see our government prioritizing this conversation. And so there would be the need for us as policy advocates to begin to engage our government to look at how we separate the issues of youth development and mainstream it so that it becomes a main conversation and the necessary resources are also allocated to it. We've seen also that government creates funds to support youth employment or entrepreneurship development, and it becomes a political tool for just the political class. And I think that if we want to see that the investments being put in these funds are utilized in an effective manner, we must sort of begin to push for the depoliticization of some of these funds. It must not just be for the political supporters of a particular government. Then we come to the private sector, where you would have either social entrepreneurs trying to put together incubator hubs to support startups and enable them, create an enabling environment for them to grow and to manage their businesses properly, and also give them the necessary training and capacity building for them to be able to effectively deliver on their mandate as founders of businesses. I think they're highly commendable, and we must begin to see a lot more of such private sector-led support for SME development, and also for private sector not just to see itself as not a part of the finding of the solution, but just as independent. I think in this sense, one of the key issues that we all know affect the entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs on the continent is the issue of financing. And we made the point the last time that there is a need for commercial banks to begin to see the need for them to prioritize SME financing, because until we accept that, yes, it is only through SMEs development that we can see our economies grow, and for the banks to begin to have the big customers in terms of indigenous businesses, it becomes a problem where the various stakeholders in this ecosystem do not see the contributions that they make into that. And for that, I think our central governments also have our central banks also have a responsibility to look at how they sort of give some concessions to commercial banks that are supporting SME development. Then the biggest responsibility, obviously, in this in finding this solution to our unemployment is us, the youth ourselves, which is we are the biggest stakeholders or the most important stakeholders when it comes to addressing the challenge. So yes, we are hoping that governments and our big institutions would find solutions or will create the enabling environment for us to flourish. But I think that the single most important group that has the responsibility of addressing this challenge is young people themselves. And I want to, on this note, highlight the importance of the African Continental Free Trade area that was adopted and is now being championed by the AFTA Secretariat and various stakeholders who are finding ways of ensuring that the policy becomes functional, and various countries or various businesses in the various African countries can begin to have trading or opportunities within different African countries. If you look at intra-African trade, we are currently less than 15%. If you look at Europe, it's more than 60%. If you look at Asia, I mean, almost all the regions are above 50%. But in Africa, our intra-African trade is less than 15%. That means that it is a challenge, but it is also a huge opportunity. And we must, as young people, begin to see the AFTA as the single most important economic liberation tool that we have now to translate our various resources, whether it's human resources, human capital, and demographic dividend, and also the natural resources we have into the prosperity, the shared prosperity that we all envisage. And so as young people join these workshop, and I'm happy that the seminar is also accompanied with a workshop, which would basically highlight some of the things that startups are supposed to do in terms of capacity building to better deliver on this. And I think I would pause here and have this as my preliminary comment before we continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benedicta, for hitting the nail right on the head. You were able to raise the issue of the mismatch between the policymakers as well as some of the problems we are facing with respect to the quality of the trainings that we are giving the youth. Our last panelist is called Odi Kaniba. Odi is a brilliant banker. He has structured a lot of deals across the continent. He works in Egypt at Afreximbank at the department in charge of SMEs and SMIs. So he's bringing the banking perspective into the talk. He has participated in the structuring of a good number of development projects in Africa. Before joining Afreximbank, Odi has 12 years of experience in London working on most of the interventions project that he has worked on has also tackled on youth development. Odi, thank you very much for making time to join this webinar. Despite your tight schedule, we are very much grateful. Now, look, hearing what has been said so far from Benedicta and Simone, what is your stake in the topic being discussed here?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sylvester, and thank you to Simone and Benedicta who came before me, because they've made my job very easy. I think in view of the points that have already been raised, I think what I want to emphasize is Afreximbank's position in terms of the role that we think that the African youth can and should be playing as far as the development of the continent is concerned, especially in terms of trade development. Now, you know, we take a position. We believe that the African youth essentially hold the key to Africa's industrial revolution, right? So we believe that if we provide them with the right level of support, that they hold the key to take the continent to the next level. And there's good reasons for that, right? If you take Africa's creative economy, for example, you know, film, music, sectors like that, the African youth with little to no support have been able to take those economies, grow them, and export them on their own, right? With little to no structured support from both the government and the private sector. So imagine what that constituency could do if they had the support that they require to grow those sectors. So you have the creative economy. You also have spaces like technology and e-commerce. You know, we have an extremely savvy youth demographic, you know, which can use these tools to really expand the African economy. And I think my sister Benedicta also briefly alluded to the opportunity that the AfCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, brings to the table. You know, all of a sudden, these young people are going to be able to trade across a market of 1.3 billion people. And so, of course, you know, we see that opportunity, and we are shaping ourselves up to support the African youth to do exactly that. So I think we are all clear on what the opportunities are, right? However, to be able to enable the youth to actually capture those opportunities, you know, we need to fully understand what the constraints are today. You know, why is it that all of that picture that I just painted isn't materializing before our eyes? It's because there are problems, there are challenges. So what we believe is that the first step is to understand what those challenges are. And then the stakeholders within the ecosystem, whether it's us as a bank or a DFI or the government or the private sector, each stakeholder within the ecosystem should use their core competencies and capabilities to resolve the barriers to youth in African trade. So what are the barriers? Many of them have already been alluded to today. There's access to capital. Of course, we all know that lenders generally require immovable collateral from which most youth cannot provide. So that makes it very difficult for them to access capital. Even in the instances where they can access that capital, the cost of credit is extremely high, often prohibitive, so much so that it kills their businesses. So it's it's almost better for them not to borrow. There's also a need for patient capital. The African youth financing ecosystem needs to really look more about providing the youth with equity rather than debt-based capital. And so these are the sorts of problems as an institution, as a financial institution, that we're trying to resolve. So this year, 2024, we are looking to launch a venture fund, for example, to address the equity gap that we believe exists as far as financing African youth is concerned. On the credit side, we continue to work with local financial institutions to try and ensure that they can lend money to the youth and SMEs at a rate that is not prohibitive, at a rate that is not going to completely destroy their businesses. So we see ourselves as thought leaders and action leaders as far as this particular problem of access to capital is concerned, and we continue to push to do everything that we can to plug that gap. Another issue that has already been alluded to, but I'll highlight again, is that of technical skills, right? So, as I said, areas such as e-commerce innovation are critical for the youth if they're to grow their businesses and if they're to scale across borders. So, what we are doing as an institution is we are driving capacity building programs. We're working with people who have pedigree and who have the ability to train hundreds, thousands of youth at the same time, to give them the skills to be able to operate within the digital economy, because we consider that to be a huge area of opportunity. And then I think the other thing to highlight is it's not just the technical skills around digital, but just general commercial skills are important. How to run a business, how to manage a business. So that is the other kind of capacity building that we are providing support to African youth with. Then there's issues around trade information. The truth is, many African youth simply do not have access to value chain information. So they don't know how or where to locate international suppliers, buyers, and so on and so forth. They also don't even know. I just spoke about the AFCFTA opportunities, but many youth don't know much about cross-border trade protocols, standards, regulatory requirements that they need to meet to be able to do that cross-border trade. So, again, we are trying to use our digital platforms to make this information available to the African youth to plug that gap. So I think these are some of the issues that we as an institution can directly intervene in, and we are doing exactly that. But there are other issues that we may not be able to mitigate as directly, which is why, as I said, other stakeholders need to come in and play their part. In some areas around infrastructure, for example, where you start having conversations about electricity and internet connectivity, these are things that the government has to do to create an enabling environment for the African youth. We can support, but other people absolutely need to take the lead. Same goes for policy issues around taxation and tariffs and compliance costs. You know, these things need to be looked at. You cannot use the same sort of compliance frameworks as you use for large corporates, for SMEs or youth-led businesses. You'll kill them, you know. So people need to take their time to work out favorable frameworks that encourage these demographics to actually trade. And one thing that we have found to be extremely useful and extremely effective is introducing actual SMEs and youth into the policy tables that matter, you know, inviting them into our discussions and inviting them to our forums so that we get their perspective. You know, I think for too long, many people like myself who wear a fancy suit and a shirt and a tie have tried to drive the policy discourse for SMEs, even though they've never actually run an SME themselves before, you know. So it is critical that we get SME perspectives, youth perspectives, because they are the ones who are on the ground and they are the ones who are actually who actually understand the pain points better than anybody else. And then that's the way to co-create and arrive at relevant policy solutions. So in summary, our response to these constraints that I just highlighted is what we are calling, or what we call, the Export SME Development Program, which is run by the SME Development Unit at Afreximbank, which I lead. Our program is broken down really into 4 key components. The first one is financing, and I already spoke about some of what we're doing in that regard. The second one is capacity building. Again, I already touched on how we go about that and who we are targeting. The third one is market access in light of the AfCFTA and the opportunities that cross-border trade form. And the last one is policy advocacy, again, which speaks to my last point about bringing the African youth onto the policy discourse. So I'll pause here, and if there's any questions further down the line, I'll be more than happy to take them. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Odi, for your presentation. You have been able to highlight the difficulties the youth are facing. I also would like to say that the problems are many. More often than not, it is the snake itself that bites itself by the tail. And the reason is that we do not know where exactly to tackle the problem from. The unemployment of agency in the sub-region. And I would like to come back to Madam Simone Debaima, who is the General Secretary of the National Agency for Small Scale Financing Guarantee. Simone, are you still on the call? Thank you very much. It has been demonstrated that the public sector has the ability to absorb the young graduates coming from our universities and tertiary institutions. But today, that same public sector can no longer absorb the number of graduates that our universities are producing year in, year out. That is why there is a need for us to develop and promote SMEs and SMI as the only tool in solving the unemployment problems. However, there are some difficulties that are operational in nature as well as structural in nature. One of them is access to a market. We have some of the youth that are courageous enough to take up the industrialization challenge as well as to create their own businesses. Now, one thing is creating a business, another thing is making the business survive. You must have capital, you must employ others, you must pay salaries, you also have other statutory provisions that you must also adhere to, such as payment of tax and so on and so forth. At the same time, these small, medium-sized companies must also compete with bigger institutions. And more often than not, when there is publication for these companies to bid for any contract, they are competing with others. And then more often than not, they ask them to show proof of experience. Now, Simone, you coming from the government end, what are some of the solutions you are providing for the young entrepreneurs, the SMEs and SMIs, to promote access to markets? You know, that is what we are talking about. Thank you very much, Dr. Sylvester Gosu. I've been expecting this question. I knew it would come. When we talk about SMEs and SMIs, the first thing that we think about is access to market. Because the company is there to add values, and after adding value, you must have access to market. Because without that, the company can never survive. That is why there must be policies to promote these companies' access to market. But my answer to your question will take so many aspects. Now, what we have observed as the solution is what I will share with you. Now, concerning the issue of access to market, the first issue that we must understand is the business model. I will explain why is the business model important. The young entrepreneur who has established a business, the youth, he does not have much of experience because he did not understand the nitty-gritties of running a business in the first instance. This is what we have noticed, that is the many problems that the SMEs and SMIs are concerned. They do not have the business sense, do not have what it takes to run a business. Therefore, capacity building is important. Now, for a company to develop, it has to base its development path on a business model that is tried and tested, so that they can have a value proposal for a given market. Now, if this is out, there's no way a newly established business can survive. What is your target market? Now, every multinational company we see today started from somewhere. That is why the business model is important. Now, talking about business model, I also talk about innovation. Take an issue, for instance, the production of soya beans. Now, a small size company who want to go into the production of soya beans must understand the value chain of the soya bean, must also understand the demand for it. Now, if a company understands this, I can tell you that 50% of the challenges that company will be facing has already been taken care of. Now, another issue I also would like to highlight is lack of mentorship. Now, for a young graduate to understand the nitty-gritties of running a business, there are so many factors that must come into vein. The person must undergo mentorship, something I call, in business terms, we call incubation. Now, you also raise the issue of competitivity. That is a challenge. How can a company use its resources to be more competitive on the market? Because out there, there's competition. Because new companies, especially SMEs and SMIs, must understand this. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the SMIs, there are multinational financial companies, institutions that are working hard to supporting some of these small size and medium size companies. That is why the youth that we are discussing here should have a mindset of learning, a mindset of taking a step forward. And I will share with you a specific case in the agricultural sector. If I take the case of Togo, for instance, the biggest sector in our economy is the agricultural sector. It is the same sector that employs the greater chunk of our population. Now, when you take that agricultural sector, the sector is vast. I had the opportunity of working on many sectors in the agricultural value chain. In order to ensure that we facilitate the integration of the agricultural value chain, we must have a lot of our youth understanding agriculture. I made reference to the soya beans sector. The soya beans sector is very important and growing steadily in Togo. And one thing you have realized is that the producers of these soya beans are competing among themselves where there is no competition. Because one, the market is there. Why don't they rather, instead of competing among themselves, come together to scale up their production capacity? In that case, they will improve the production technique, they'll improve their other agricultural best practices. Now, all that there is for the first producer, the one producing the value chain to do, they will do it once they come together instead of competing among themselves. Now, in addition to this, we also have the middlemen. They are establishing the link between the producers and the market. Now, somewhere along the line, we also have those who are processing the soya beans. Now, there must be the understanding between them that across this value chain, all the players are important. Therefore, the survival of one will determine how far the other can go. That is why they must seek for the survival of each and all the other players on the value chain. Now, I will also give you the example of the poultry sector. The poultry sector in Togo is facing a lot of difficulties simply because the current market size is such that we have a lot of imported chicken and so on and so forth. And any company that want to go into poultry production at the startup, you do not have the means, they do not have not only the technical know-how, but also the financial resources. And one of the difficulties they face is the feed. The feed for the poultry has become so expensive that any ordinary citizen would prefer going to consume an imported chicken instead of buying a locally reared chicken, which is more expensive because of the inputs such as feed and many other more. Now, how do they even have access to the raw materials? Talking about the raw materials, I'm talking about the day-old chicks. Now, we do not have any company that produces the day-old chicks in the country. Therefore, they must be imported. But supposing we have 2 or 3 companies that are producing the day-old chicks, and to cut down drastically, the importation fees, and all the other fatalities that might occur when these DOHs are being imported and transported to the final farms. Therefore, it is quite an integrated approach that we must look at. And the government cannot be left out. The government must play a key role, because if we acknowledge that the SMEs and SMIs are important, and if we also acknowledge that agricultural sector is key in our respective countries, policies must be channeled towards that in order to promote agricultural production. Now, I can also talk about financing. We do know that majority of companies are micro businesses, and these micro businesses do not have the financial muscles to start and sustain their businesses within a long period of time before they can stand on themselves. More often than not, they go to the banks, but the banks are not interested because the policies are not right. We also understand that a youth cannot stand up today and start creating a business tomorrow. There must be the homework done first. That is where we want to promote cooperatives or partnerships. Even if it is 2 or 3 young people who are coming together to run a business, it is more credible and access to financing will be easier. But it will interest you to know that many of our youth do not even understand the type of business models and the type of companies that they can use to survive in the company. Could it be a sole proprietorship? Could it be a partnership? Or could it be a business limited by shares? That is why we are promoting cooperatives and promoting partnerships. 2 or 3 or 4, even 10 young guys coming together with a very serious business model, then they can have easy access to financing. We must also understand that the bank's business is not to be investing. The bank is in the business of making money. That is why if a project is not bankable, no bank will look at that project. But startups always have this problem. Startups always have difficulties having access to financing. Therefore, government across the sub-region should commit resources to promoting conducive environment for startups. When I'm talking about value chain of financing, we have started self-financing in Togo. We also have a decentralized financing systems. These decentralized financing system are planted in all the regions and districts and they identified bankable projects and give macro financing to them. And when the company attains a certain maturity, they can now go and contact the bank with the support of the Ministry of Agriculture to have access to financing. But I must say that this is not easy, because more are the youth who are discouraged along the way, because maybe the understanding of entrepreneurship maybe is to make money within the shortest possible time. Now, we do know that in Togo, for instance, we also have multinational companies who are competing in the same market. And I would like to use the opportunity to speak to that. We do know that these big companies are well established. And when there is any competitive bidding opportunities, companies or institutions will favor these big companies. But if we continue, what will become of our small and medium-sized companies? Sometimes even government institutions will prefer to give contract to foreign companies instead of giving opportunities to local companies. If we continue in that regard, when can we create jobs? When can our local companies also become multinationals? That is why the contribution of the government must come to play. There must be affirmative action, something I will call positive discrimination. And this can only be done by government policies to give chances to local companies. We are not asking these local companies or the SMEs to have 20 years of experience. All we are asking is to have a proper business model, put in place the proper business plan so that they can be given opportunity. As I said, the government must play a key role. Now, today, 25% of contracts are reserved for women-led businesses and SMEs and SMIs. All public contracts, 25% of them is reserved for them. And these are some of the initiatives that government can emulate to promote the SMIs and SMEs. We are a government agency. We work closely with the SMEs and SMIs. That is why we are sharing these experiences with you. I think I've taken too long a time. It looks as if I'm monopolizing the floor. I would like to end here. However, I will still unveil myself if there's any issue that will need my attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for tackling the operational aspects. The last question that I would want you to answer concretely is, in the European economic space, there were small companies that were incubation centers, and they were isolated. When you are a young entrepreneur, when you are isolated and you are a startup, there is nothing positive in this. So in these countries, governments try to set up incubation centers and also make available advisory services to assist the youth, train them, advise them, and help them to succeed. These are things that we can import and also implement in our community, that is ECOWAS community. So based on your experience, is there this type of incubation center in the ECOWAS space to help the youth, that is the SMEs, SMIs, and then the startups? Thank you for this question. Yes, we have a program. And there are enterprises at the national level also, and they are to develop incubators, not only in Lome, but across the entire country to enable enterprises or businesses to easily have access to them. The role is to, some of them are like centers of excellence for the youth. For a good economic impact in on the society. So we have, I think, 3 of such centers in Togo, and recently in Cote d'Ivoire, they have several of them. And it is a very good thing because it makes it possible to pool efforts. Apart from these incubators, as innovating solutions, we also have certified centers, which is a positive thing for businesses. So I'll stop here concerning the incubators. We also have an investment center, which is also a solution to encourage young businesses. Thank you, Simon. I would want to discuss with Madam Benedicta when the problem of unemployment or youth employment, when we are looking at it, the authorities are normally not committed. They are criticized, and sometimes we criticize or stigmatize the situation of the youth. Statistics have shown that there is a mismatch between the training that this youth receive and then the labor market. So this is crucial. If the skills they have are not marketable, we cannot employ this youth, even if the mission does not meet this. So a business is not a charity organization. So Benedicta, I want to ask you on means that we can put in place so that skills of this youth can correspond to the real market demands for employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you're right in saying that there's a skills mismatch in terms of trainings that we received in the various institutions. I think the vocational and technical institutions are quite pointed in their training, but what we are realizing overall is that somebody can be a very good carpenter, for instance. However, if the person does not know how to run a business, the person would still sort of want to be employed. And so the question of entrepreneurship education, and I think OD, I don't know if the Afri-Exim Bank is looking at this, but I think that the issue of entrepreneurship education must be prioritized. We are seeing a lot of ICT graduates, people going into various ICT centers to acquire certain certifications, people in the creative industry. But if you have the skill and you do not have an entrepreneurial mindset or training or capacity to translate that skill into a business, it becomes very difficult. And so from government policy to development assistance strategies that, let's say, our government and our institutions, for instance, like EBID and Afri-Exim, we need to begin to look at how we make entrepreneurship the foundational course, really, because I went to the university, studied political science, sociology as my first degree. Yes, let's say I've dabbled in a bit of politics, but really, I'm not necessarily applying those skills or what I learned in the social sciences to create jobs. Maybe for policy, yes, it is important. But as we have recognized that it is only entrepreneurship that would lead us or help us create the economic prosperity that we all desire, I think we must begin to prioritize educational policy to look at entrepreneurship education, as well as look at how the multilateral institutions like ECOWAS and the supporting institutions, EBID, BWADE, and the other institutions that are also involved in the capacity building, begins to look at how we do let's say an audit of our educational curriculum to see which programs must be prioritized. And it must be government policy, really, because as I said, if we begin to mainstream the conversation on youth development, then you are looking at a 360 view of how we develop our young people, from education to how we build their capacity to manage and run businesses. I think the other point that I need to make, and I think maybe myself and the two panelists, Simone and Odi, would have to maybe circle back and have a much in-depth conversation on, is how we begin to share the best stories of private sector on the continent. We've seen a lot of family businesses just survive the original visioneer. So the first, somebody starts a business and then they're successful, and then it's not able to be an independent, or the company is not able to be sustained after the person, let's say, passes on or retires or something. But you're seeing that in the East, for instance, South Korea, Japan, their car companies and your Samsungs and all the gadgets that we see coming from those markets, they're run by family businesses, right? And so the question then is, how do we begin to build this ecosystem of entrepreneurship support and development, to not just look at businesses running or people building businesses for themselves and not doing any planning when it comes to the sustainability of businesses. I think it's a very important conversation that needs to be had. We did an assessment in Ghana recently, and we realized that most of the family businesses are either those that are third generation. We only have mostly the Indian companies or the Lebanese companies, but we know that we've had several entrepreneurs in the country over the years. But the question is, how come we've not had these businesses live beyond the founders of these businesses? So there's a much broader conversation that needs to be had on our entrepreneurship ecosystem and how we build capacity to deliver, but also how we begin to look at what is success in entrepreneurship, and how do we encourage businesses to develop sustainable models for continuity. But yes, your question to the point of skills mismatch, we have to get our governments to look at that now. But that doesn't mean that if you take a particular course in school, you cannot diversify or pivot into another area. I would use myself as an example. Many years ago, I dabbled in a bit of politics, and in my campaign, I realized, okay, the people were struggling to have access to fertilizer in my community, and I decided to try to support with agricultural inputs, and I didn't have the money, and so I could have said yes, I did not have the money, but I approached the agricultural company, I think OCP at the time, and spoke to them about this, and they started off with giving me a bit of a credit line. And I think this credit line, in terms of product credit, is a form of solution for financing startups if one is able to demonstrate. And it also requires our young entrepreneurs to prove themselves as serious and credible businesses. If you start small and you grow the business, you understand that, yes, maybe you can get a credit line on certain products. You can build a sustainable business looking at that model as well. So it's not always the banks and it's not always the government that must provide financing, but if the business you are trying to produce requires that you get some supplies from suppliers, you can actually go in and try to negotiate how you can get credit lines for your business. And I think being determined about succeeding is what would make you stand out as an entrepreneur. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedicta. Oti, with your experience on the continental level in assisting several stakeholders in the public and private sectors, what in your opinion, is the way you think governments and the private sector stakeholders cooperate efficiently and come out with the best market strategies for the youth? Because everybody has to come on board as we try to resolve this problem. So what are the concrete measures that the sector can put in place to resolve this issue of youth unemployment? Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Sylvester. I think you are absolutely spot on. I think this is an ecosystem play, and every stakeholder within the ecosystem has to do their part for it to work. So from a private sector standpoint, I think the private sector, including banks and financial institutions and DFIs like ourselves, we need to do more to create financing solutions that support the youth and SMEs, right? I cannot overemphasize the point around not using the same lending and investment frameworks that you use for mature companies for smaller SMEs and youth-led companies. It's not going to work, right? So we need to be deliberate, and we need to co-create and develop fit-for-purpose financing instruments that target the youth, so that they can receive the kind of capital on the right set of terms that allow them to grow their businesses and make the sort of contribution into the African economy that we know that they can. I think the issue of capacity building also sits at least partially with the private sector. I think the private sector need to think about capacity building as an investment. It's very easy to consider training and capacity building as a cost center. It's not. It's actually an investment that yields in the longer term better qualified, better equipped, better able entrepreneurs to actually contribute to the economy. So, I invite the private sector to think about any money or any resources that they put towards training and capacity building in that light. Of course, the government needs to do some of it as well, but I definitely think that the private sector has a role to play as far as that is concerned. Then there's the issues that I think sit squarely with the government, issues around taxation, for example, and issues around compliance. The costs of complying with government regulation can be extremely high for SMEs and youth-led businesses. As a matter of fact, it can be so high that they are disincentivized to formalize. It's actually more efficient for them to remain under the radar as informal businesses. So that's not what we want. What we want is for all of the youth, all of the SMEs to formalize and be active members of the economy. And, we need government support to make those things happen. Same goes for issues around tariffs. Again, you almost need to make concessions as far as tariffs are concerned to enable the youth to participate in trade and general economic activity. I think around policy, one other area that I would just like to touch on, especially because, I think I've emphasized innovation and e-commerce and technology and even the creative economy as high focus areas. There's the issue around intellectual property, right? Which is relatively new to the continent, but something that, the rest of the world is on top of, right? The ideas, the solutions that our youth come up with, need to be protected from an intellectual property standpoint. You know, they need IP protection, and they also need to be able to monetize their intellectual property. So the policy frameworks to enable those things to happen are not mainstream at the moment. I think as a continent, or you know, as ECOWAS, but also as a continent, we really need to think thoroughly about intellectual property laws, because the youth demographic are the ones who are most likely to benefit from that. Finally, infrastructure. You know, the youth, they need the internet, they need electricity. You know, again, the government needs to lead, the public sector needs to lead as far as making that infrastructure available for them. Without those basics, they're simply not going to be able to take advantage of all of these opportunities that we've all been speaking about over the course of the last hour and a half. You know, I think I'll stop here for now, and if there's any follow-on questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odi. We have touched on the different problems, and we've taken account of the questions that were asked. And we have tackled the operational aspects, the practical aspects, and we need the operationality aspects. So the main discussion is very interesting. So the idea meets the need of redesigning everything and coming out with rational solutions. Your various interventions which have been reached has made it possible for us to touch on some of them. So we want to thank you. I want to point out here that the webinar will be followed by a workshop dedicated to business development with seasoned entrepreneurs who are also part of this workshop, who will be in the position to answer your answers and give you the secrets and hacks with which you can develop your business efficiently. So we are requesting you to remain and participate in this workshop. We have the English channel, we have the French channel, and the Portuguese channel. We also request you to fill the questionnaire at the end of the workshop, and you give us your different reactions. The idea is to serve you better next time as far as this topic is concerned. We are virtually at the end of our webinar. I want to, on behalf of EBID, thank our eminent panelists who were generous in sharing with us their experiences and then proposing solutions. I think that this webinar is a follow-up to the youth session that we held during the ECOWAS investment forum. So this is something that we need to deepen and continue, because we shall work together and put together solutions. So I think that if we work together, we can succeed, so that we do away with this issue of unemployment. So let's move to the workshop on business development. So we meet at the other side. So have a good day, all of you, and see you soon.
We are EBID. EBID, transforming ECOWAS communities. We have more information for you at www.bidc-ebid.org.